So we have one more pass catcher that I want to make sure we talk about because at the end of the day, I think he's going to make a pretty big adjustment into a team that is losing over 2,000 yards from two guys that were drafted, and that is, of course, the newest, Coastal Carolina Chanticleer, Sam Pinckney. He's originally from Georgia State, so he's staying inside the Sun Belt Conference. And Javon Hiley, one of those names that left, he is, I believe, 6'4", 6'3", maybe. And you can see a lot of similarities with Pinckney in his build. I'm not 100% confident in number 2 either, but I do feel a lot better with where he's at, and that is Tyler Van Dyke of Miami. All told, he put up phenomenal numbers with talent far inferior compared to everybody else on this list other than Grayson McCall, probably. Will Levis, you might have an argument there, but Tyler Van Dyke, in games he played more than 10 snaps in, he never had less than 200 yards. There was a game where he had 11 throws and still eclipsed 200 and something odd yards. So he's a very, very good player. And again, going back to what we were talking about with Hendon Hooker earlier, maybe it's just not enough tape on the guy, but he became the ACC's one of their better, if not their best quarterback last year. The Giants need an offensive identity. Brian Dable is going to be able to supply one, whether it's with Daniel Jones. Again, very similar to what I liked with Kevin O'Connell. Brian Dable is going to have a lot of flexibility. He can keep Daniel Jones. He can move on. It doesn't really matter. They're going to get things figured out. I wouldn't be shocked if he moves Saquon. There's a lot that he gets to handle here that could make the Giants a pretty solid team. Man, Sonny is a very, very good head coach. And when you look at his total record, it doesn't look like he's as great as he is, but that's because his stint at Cal really weighted his record down. I believe that's the only stop that he ever had that was below 500. And even at that time in Cal, he put a team in the AP poll at some time in the year. He had one at Louisiana Tech, one at Cal, and then all of his past 3 years at SMU. There's a lot to really, really enjoy about Sonny Dykes, and one of the things that you should immediately be able to tell the boost from is their offense. SMU last year was 14th in yards per game in the country. TCU was 60th. And him being able to bring in the mindset that created that SMU offense over these past few years should really boost TCU moving forward. It's going to be dual back season for Herbert and Montgomery. You can't move past it at this point. You have to worry about Montgomery's health. And Khalil Herbert last year performed really, really well whenever you asked him to take on a bigger workload. In the games where he got 15 plus carries, there was 4 of them. He had 3 games of over 4 yards per carry, which I'll take it. Every running back's going to have a bad game, but if you're hitting 75% of over 4 yards per carry, usually you're doing enough to remain getting those snaps. There were a couple different options I could have went with Houston. I had John Greenard and Nico Collins written down as well, but I've got a good feeling about Brevin Jordan this year, and a lot of it has to do with Jordan Atkins not being on the roster anymore. That clears up over 200 yards in the tight end room. Pharaoh Brown, who started the most games at tight end last year, wasn't all that much of a receiving option. Brevin Jordan supplies that in spades. That's kind of his main thing, is being a receiver. I think it's Gabriel Davis's time to step up to the plate. Buffalo has spent the offseason trying to convince people that the running back room is going to be a large focus this year. I don't believe them. I simply don't. When you have a quarterback like Josh Allen who can throw it all over the field, and by the way, he can basically be your run game too, I think you stick with what you know, and realistically what could have gotten you to the Super Bowl if it wasn't for one coin toss. So, like I mentioned, Cole Beasley and Emmanuel Sanders leaving, that opens up the wide receiver 2 position just wide open. I know Jamison Crowder is there now. I don't really see him becoming a wide receiver 2, especially not at this point in his career, but I think he'll be a reliable slot receiver as Gabriel Davis kind of becomes Stephon Diggs' running mate. Cam Akers this year, I believe, will be on his revenge tour. I believe he got 5 rushes last year before his season was just done, and that left the Rams in a bit of a scramble. We saw a lot of Darrell Henderson. all last season, and you see these moving parts. Sony Michel, I think Cam Akers comes back in, and so long as that health stays with him, he should just take that running back room right back over. So Rattler is the quarterback at South Carolina, and we need to know, is he the guy? Once upon a time, Spencer Rattler was the future of college football. He was the prize that Oklahoma managed to win with Lincoln Riley, and he was going to become the next in line of their endless Heisman candidates. Then everything kind of fell apart. I believe he spent 3 years there. He got 9 games last season, if I'm recalling correctly. Caleb Williams, for the most part, kind of passed him up, and everything just the narrative around Spencer Rattler completely flipped on its head. It went from this prodigy child, somebody who was going to come in and set football alight. He was the potential number 1 draft pick entering the season last year, decided that he would be better off staying in college but leaving his team and moving to a different one as the year went on, and now we'll get to see that in South Carolina. Maybe my big winner here is James Madison University coming into the FBS. It feels like a really good decision, especially to go into the Sun Belt, because when you look at the top of the conference, right now it's Coastal, it's App State, maybe Arkansas State bounces back. They were abnormally bad last year. Butch Jones did not field a great team last year, but typically they are a very good program. So that'll be interesting to watch. Louisiana was performing well under Billy Napier. You've got to assume they've at least got a year or two of holdover that's going to keep them where they're at. So there's a lot to like here, but I think you can also say the future is uncertain there as well with Jamie Chadwell. Does he stay in Coastal? Does Arkansas State make the rebound? Louisiana, how long can they hold that up now that Napier's gone? App State, I feel like they're still holding over a little bit on the Eli Drinkwitz talent. So you've got an opportunity to really go in and make some noise in a conference that could very well likely become the best FBS or the best group of 5 conference now with what happened to the AAC. You have Dabo Swinney, Mario Cristobal's there now, and outside of that, I'm questioning a whole lot of things. You've got Pat Narduzzi, who has looked decent, but his results are inconsistent. Norvell still trying to build a program. Matt Brown, he's a legend, but I don't know why he needs to be coaching right now. UNC doesn't look like some hard hitter right now. They have gotten worse every year, I believe they went up a win or two in 2020 and then came back down last year. Either way, he's not winning them a ton of games, no matter how great his name is. It doesn't look like a long-term beneficial thing for UNC. They are carried by, for lack of a better expression here, they're carried by a bunch of dead men walking because they're not going to be AAC coaches for much longer. Luke Fickell, Dana Holgerson, Gus Malzahn. It is those 3 guys who define the conference right now. Among their top, they're pretty close to the top. I would definitely have Fickell in my top 10 probably, and then Holgerson and Malzahn I can guarantee top 50, but that in and of itself for a group of 5 conference is really good. I believe they ended up with like 3 or 4 4-star recruits, and obviously Travis Hunter is a 5-star just between those 2. I know they got that kid from A&M who got bumped up to a 4-star in his transfer portal. It's incredible what he is doing, and you can see a lot of it is being founded upon the energy that he is bringing into Jackson State, something that Florida State does not have right now. Oklahoma had a lot of talent going out, a lot of them going to USC, and they're ranked pretty high up there too. Brent Venables is going to have a handful with what he has to do in this upcoming season, and putting them at 14 with 9 total starters between the offense and defense returning with a new head coach. It feels insane to me. If you can kind of recreate the best of the Pac-12 inside the Big Ten, so you're getting your USC versus UCLA, you're getting your USC versus Oregon, and you're getting your USC versus Arizona State or USC versus Utah or whoever you want to plug in there, and you're getting the occasional USC versus Michigan State, USC versus Penn State. It's all that can possibly do is create a more thorough strength of schedule for everybody. And even if you are having, let's say you get the luck of the draw and you get to take some of those bottom barrel teams from outside of your pod, you're still pretty uniform across all of these things. And now the only real discrepancy is, okay, do we think the Big 12 is, or the Big 10 rather, do we think the Big 10 is stronger? Do we think the SEC is stronger? I believe they'll win their conference, but it's easy to see them being like double or half or however that would work from where they are currently ranked in the early not in the early top 25. That's Tennessee. Tennessee had absolutely zero right to do what they did with Josh Heupel last year. Going 7-6 was a borderline miracle, but when you look at why that happened and you look at the production they had, their offense with another season is going to be incredible. They stepped up and had one of their better years in recent memory, maybe of all time. I'm not a Michigan football historian by any means, but they had a really strong season. But is it truly sustainable? When you look at the roster, most of their defense will look different entirely. Ojabo, Hutchinson, Daxton Hill, Josh Ross, they're all gone. Hassan Haskins, Andrew Stuber on offense. There's a lot of moving around and things that are, changing for Michigan. I referenced at the very beginning of this video that one of the things that inspired me to potentially do this was the underrated, overrated mini-series that I had. Tennessee was a huge focus point in that series, and I've got them all the way into the 10th spot at the final bit of the season. The consensus third best SEC team finishes lower than the Tennessee Volunteers. That would be Texas A&M. Everybody seems to be pretty on board that they're the third best team. I'm not. I'm absolutely not. I'll take Tennessee every day of the week. I think that Mario Cristobal getting there might help realign a little bit of that, and I think he'll get Miami just as a whole in working order and get stuff figured out pretty quick. He has a really nice schedule to start off the season to get them in line. It's the end of the year that's really going to be the trick. You've got UVA, Florida State, Clemson, Pitt. They're all candidates to damage them. I'll take FSU, Clemson, and Pitt beating them, especially after they've kind of more or less coasted their way to the end of the season. And similar to Houston and Cincy, they're just too much better than other AAC schools to really get stuck off the rankings. Probably come in at 10-2, similar to Cincy, one win back from Houston. I've got them losing to Cincy, got them losing to Louisville, and Mikey Keene is kind of the driver because obviously Gus Malzahn knows how to coach. I don't really have to say that. I think everybody that at least is seeking out this podcast probably knows that Gus Malzahn is a very formidable coach, very well-known coach, has had his successes, so you don't have to touch on that, but Mikey Keene looks like he's their next quality quarterback. Braylon Allen, who I really think could be the nation's top running back this year, and just seeing Wisconsin's general build and history and some of the lack of questions at quarter, or not lack of questions, but some of the lack of proof of how good Graham Mertz is going to be. I think you really lean into that run first system, and Braylon Allen came out and really announced himself as being a really talented running back and being one of the guys to watch last year, and I think it transitions just fine over to this season. If you'll remember during my Big 12 5 biggest questions for the season, or Big 10 rather, sorry, during that I was quick to praise Nebraska, and I like them a lot as a team, and one of the reasons is because I like that Casey Thompson is now on the roster. He, for whatever reason, Texas wasn't in love with him. He was given the reins and was kind of treated like a stopgap quarterback that they even, he could have went out there and won a Heisman, and they probably would have been like, well, Quinn Ewers is an option. And so everything about that was very strange to me, and now he's going to a school that I fully believe will put their full support behind him. If you don't know him, it's because he has gotten to the point where he is so consistently good that people don't even bother really bringing it up, because it's like, oh yeah, Kyle Whittingham's going to go out there and win 9 games each year. Like that's just the rule. Like that's what Kyle Whittingham does. And it's almost become to his detriment, because if he were to have like a 6-7 win season, I think he would get talked about a lot more. And whenever he comes back out and has a 10-win season, then it would almost go away, because people don't really talk about Utah football right now, especially because the Pac-12 is not what it used to be with USC, and now Oregon's probably on the decline, and the Pac-12 right now isn't really all that stable or solid or really high up in the rankings as far as Power 5 conferences go, and Kyle Whittingham has quietly been one of the best head coaches in college football for a very long time. Coach Pittman, he's somehow getting these guys in now, these very talented recruits to come to this state and get people to really buy in. And that's something that Arkansas has not had since Petrino. And it's weird to, kind of comparing to that because they're day and night as far as individuals. Petrino was not the best of people, still isn't. Pittman, I've heard nothing but great things about Coach Pittman, but he is getting it to where these people believe that Arkansas football could mean something, and after that sharp turnaround that they just had, who's to say they can't go out there and win 8-9 games again and be really competitive and keep building up as time moves on. As of right now, I'm not just totally in on that. Plus, you got to look at their schedule, and that's really where I got caught up, is because when you look at their schedule, you've got Ohio State week 1, then you got BYU, you've got Clemson, and you've got USC. So that's 3 schools that I believe were in the top 15 or 16. I don't remember exactly where USC finished, but that's 2 college football playoff schools that are listed on this poll. And then you've got 5 who has to play both of them and presumably lose to both of them to be in that spot. Chadwell has been the real driver and has very much so been in the driver's seat for Coastal's rise to CFB prominence. And I mean prominence in a real way. They've been in the top 25. They've been a very good program while he's been there. But I think a school like Auburn could be enough to tempt him out of Coastal and finally pull him in, to these big schools. The main reason that he decided to step down is it was reported that he was the first quarterback out of the QB competition right now going on at LSU. It looks like Jaden Daniels might be the favorite there. I know they've got another guy in the building that could potentially edge him out. He looked pretty good in the spring game. His name's escaping me right now, but he was informed that he is the last horse in the race. So what that really means to me is that Brian Kelly, whenever he tried to recruit, or not really recruit, but recruit in a sense, he pulled Brennan out of the transfer portal. He convinced him to stay at LSU and compete for the job. The fact that so much has changed between the point of Brian Kelly being hired and requesting the quarterback to come back and compete and try to be a part of this program to being the first horse out of the race, that says a lot about the situation at LSU even early into Brian Kelly's tenure. The roster as it stands looks like it could be ready to make a jump. And you're seeing a lot of that respect coming from the polls, whether it be the coaches poll, the AP poll. They were 5-7 last year, but they did get a first place nomination in the coaches poll, and they were the first team out, or the second team out rather, in the AP poll. So they're seen as a top 30 team by both the coaches and the Associated Press. So you've got to be interested at the bare minimum of what this team's going to look like. If I had to give a prediction, I'm going to say Ohio State wins by at least 3 scores. That could even climb to 4, depending on how long they leave the starters out there. I think that they're such a different level of team than Notre Dame is prepared to be right now. They'll grow into themselves, but to start the season, I'm not in quite, on Notre Dame through these first 2, 3, 4 weeks. I think it's going to be them finding their footing and getting everything figured out. I get change, especially within college football, is scary. It's a very sacred and prestigious and has been held kind of preserved for a very long time. But the matter of the fact is that you have to capitalize on financial aspects of things, and you have to capitalize on how to make the game better and draw in more eyes. 12 teams in the college football playoffs absolutely draws in more eyes. Their spots at 12 and 13 are really a catch-22 for me because I get both sides of it. I just don't really know how you play off of it. On one hand, you've got Florida, who just beat what was perceived as the 7th-ranked team in the country starting this season. It makes sense to have them at 12 or 14 or 15 or whatever because they beat a really good team. But on the other hand, this team that you perceived as great in their first game of the season lost to an unranked team. So putting them at 13 feels very weird to me. There's a lot of interesting weirdness that came out of that. The first one I want to focus on is, where does Notre Dame go from here? I don't know how high they could feasibly get after starting 0-2, one to unranked Marshall, who, by the way, was the 26th team according to votes, which I found very funny. They would not even be scratching the surface if it would have been any other team besides Notre Dame. If they beat number 23 in the country, they're still not getting any votes. And when you look at Notre Dame, their schedule is still BYU, Stanford. Stanford gave USC some problems. They'll have to play USC as well. And you've got Clemson. They're all still on the schedule. If they manage to beat all of those teams, and I do not think they will, are they a top 8 team? We know they can't get into the college football playoffs, but that is an incredible resume, especially if you knock off BYU, USC, and Clemson. So where do they go from here? It seems that Jimbo could have to give up play calling duties if the team struggle continues. That's something that was brought up. I believe I saw it on ESPN. So there's already at least people looking at it and being like, okay, we've got to figure out changes here. And it seems to start with what Jimbo is doing within the program, or at least during game days. So if he is asked to step down from play calling, and they've got a pretty tough opponent that we'll talk about here in a little bit when we get into predictions, but if he is asked to step down from play calling duties, if the team fixes themselves after that, it'll be fine. But if they still can't get on track, because it, at the end of the day, is still his roster, he is still in charge of growing and improving these young men, if they can't figure it out, he's probably going to be gone. Bobby Petrino still very clearly has a lot left in the tank as far as being a head coach goes. I mean, he just went toe-to-toe with his old team, a team that was currently ranked right around that top 10 spot, and almost beat them. If we stopped that game at the end of the third quarter, Missouri State walked out of there as champions. So I find it really interesting that one of these guys, who, by the way, the one who had the most recent issue was Urban Meyer in the NFL. He was kicking Josh Lambo and staying off the team flight to do things that I'm sure you've seen the video. I don't feel like I have to explain that situation to you, but he is coming off of a horrendous situation in Jacksonville, but he's still being considered. I'm just curious as to why Bobby Petrino is not on that list. As genuinely cool as it is to see the Orange run off wins against Louisville and Purdue, it can't last, right? It's Syracuse, and it's not. Rome wasn't built in a day. If Syracuse comes back and becomes a great football program down the line, awesome. But I can't imagine them turning it around from last year and then immediately becoming somebody to actually watch for in the ACC, especially when you have to play SEC teams ACC. They have to play Virginia this upcoming week. That's not an easy team to beat. Brennan Armstrong is always capable of coming out there. It's kind of like Purdue. If they have to get into the mud like they did against Purdue with Aiden O'Connell, is that going to be enough to do it 2 weeks in a row? He has 674 passing yards, 139 rushing yards, 5 total touchdowns in those 2 games against ranked opponents, those opponents being Pittsburgh and Florida. So incredible numbers you're seeing there. He's yet to throw an interception. It doesn't matter who the competition is. He goes out there and does what he's going to do. Even though the teams know that he's the focal point of the Tennessee offense, they can't stop him. And you look at just his total numbers. He's got a 71.4% completion rate, 1,200 yards, or just short of it. I think it's 1,170 in 4 games. Tennessee also, whenever you weigh in the fact that it's still kind of a team award, it has to be a really good player on a really good team, Tennessee's look great. Quite frankly, it's embarrassing what Wisconsin can do to a coach. And quite frankly, if I was the next guy that they want to bring in, I wouldn't be interested in the job purely because of how little dignity they gave Paul Chryst in his release. If you take out the COVID year and what they were likely headed for this season, Paul Chryst's worst record at Wisconsin was 8 wins. 8 wins, and they just fired him because he's off to a 2-3 start. Now, a lot of this does seem to play that they want Jim Leonhard to be the guy to step in, their current defensive coordinator, and that's who's taken the interim position. They want him to be the guy moving forward. It seems like they were scared of losing him, which, to some degree I understand. But riddle me this. How can you justify firing a head coach based on poor defense that allowed Illinois to win the game and then immediately promote the defensive coordinator who oversees said defense into the interim position and is seemingly the guy you want to take the job long term? TCU versus Kansas was not supposed to be a big game coming into the season, at least in my mind. You had Sonny Dykes rebounding. Kansas is Kansas. There's not a whole lot of hope there, and at least at that point in the process of where they were coming into the year, it didn't appear like there was much hope. Now we get into this week and we see that both teams are unbeaten, and it's going to be one of the bigger matchups that the Big 12 has produced, at least to this point. Give me TCU. I think that they're going to continue their undefeated run against Kansas, largely because of Sonny Dykes, the coaching. Plus, I just think TCU's roster is built better for success, and largely because of where they get to recruit out of. This is why you wait on a head coach to figure it out. Marcus Freeman came in with a lot of support from the Notre Dame faithful and lost it very quickly because he didn't know what the job required of being a head coach, because of course he didn't. He had never done it before. But now that he's learning what that position entails, he's figuring it out pretty fast, and he's learning how to get his guys on his side and learning really how to use his roster to the best of its abilities. I think Tennessee is going to go in there and beat Alabama. Granted, it is in Tennessee, but I think that they've got the momentum. I think they've got the talent. I think they've got what you need right now. And I just think Alabama is lacking that certain quality that we typically expect from the Crimson Tide. Michigan's ground game, again, their front five, that offensive line has been incredible. Their defense rebounded very well. After losing Ojabo and Dax Hill and Hayden Hutchinson and Josh Ross and all these guys last year, a lot of crucial pieces. Josh Ross not as much, but Dax Hill and those two edge rushers meant everything to that defense and was a big reason on why they beat Ohio State. That they've come back and they look, not as good, but they still look very, very good. Still one of the top defenses in the Big Ten right now. This UCLA team is rolling, and now they stay as the only undefeated team in the Pac-12 after USC lost. UCLA has such a high-powered offense, and they've held high-powered offenses like Washington at bay. They've managed to keep them kind of on the edge, and they've even found rhythm against good defenses like Utah. They've faced a lot of good quality things that you're seeing on the football field. Maybe it's not everything all at once, but they've proven that they can get over the hump in these different scenarios. You might feel robbed. You might feel less than because you weren't reaching these same highs and you weren't going undefeated. But despite all of that, Tanner Mordecai, Kamar Wheaton, Jimmy Phillips, the team as a whole have helped keep them at 3-4. They narrowly lost to Cincy this week. They lost by 2 points, a team that is in the AP poll. And when you boil it down even further, you look at the losses to Maryland and TCU. Those games were both decided by one score. It wasn't like these Power 5 schools came into your home or you came into theirs and they just mopped the floor with you. It was a one-score thing. The numbers are great for both teams. I'm not going to sit here and deny it. I literally started this off by saying that Cincinnati has done a phenomenal job of bouncing back. That said, UCF, they seem to be just that little bit better in every single aspect. I love this game for UCF. I love the fact that it's in formerly known as the Bounce House. FBC Mortgage Stadium or Arena or something along those lines. I love that they'll have the fans to their back. We know that that's an environment that can get pretty hectic. And plus, when you look across the sidelines, I'm not saying Gus Malzahn is a better coach than Luke Fickell, but I do know that Gus Malzahn has been to more competitive games, has been in more competitive environments than Luke Fickell has. Why would I stop now? I believe the Tennessee Volunteers are going to win the SEC, and that starts next week with the game against Georgia. You'll hear about plenty on my predictions, but when Tennessee goes to play Georgia and they are able to beat Georgia, I don't see what's stopping them from going out there and beating Alabama. They've caught fire, and they've been so good. They even looked great against Kentucky last week, who, depending on what you think about them, is either very, very impressive or kind of impressive. What realistically is the second largest game of this slate that we're coming up on is Alabama versus LSU. I think LSU got a lot of inflation from being featured so highly on the poll. They're number 10 coming into this game. I think Alabama absolutely decimates them because I don't like what I've seen from LSU, and I have a lot of issues believing that the team that we're seeing on the field is the same team from what we saw earlier in the year. Who does that really leave? Well, you got Bo Nix maybe, Caleb Williams, Michael Penix Jr. Those are all my guys that I'm looking at for the Pac-12. They've all had really good seasons, but Michael Penix Jr. is coming off of a week where he looked flat, so even that's worrying. Corum and C.J. Stroud, they're not out of it. Hendon still leads for the SEC options. I don't really see a whole lot of anything else coming up through the ranks there. I don't think Stetson Bennett is Heisman level, but I do think he is a good quarterback. Drake May has some potential. That's a name to remember. I like what resume he has put together and what numbers he's putting together, so that could be interesting, especially as we get into the late stages of it. I could absolutely see him being a finalist. The Horned Frogs do not care about what you think about the Horned Frogs. They go out there every single week. It does not matter what the line is. It does not matter who is across from them. They find a way to win. This week, sneaky thing that we might not have known about really as a collective unit here, their defense might actually have some value to it and be able to cause some damage. I mean, when you look at the numbers, they did a really good job of proving that they are not a one-trick pony. The Oklahoma Sooners have been outright bad this year, man. Like, they're still not bowl eligible, and we are 2 games away from the season ending. That's how dire this year has been for the Sooners. Oklahoma State's not been, incredible by any means either. That's who they draw this week, and I think that Oklahoma State pushes the Sooners one more week to not be bowl eligible. Lane's sitting there, and you've either got the option of going to Auburn and having what is a 5-year head start if you can stick the landing. You might not still be at Auburn by the time that ends. Do you think what you can build at Auburn is at the same level as what Alabama and the infrastructure that they have built will already be able to give you? Because I've said it multiple times on this podcast, I think he's a shoo-in to take that job when Saban steps down.